Dopoledne vám přeju, vážení studenti. My jsme se dneska sešli na dalším z předmětu hospodářská politika. Nicméně na začátek tohoto, první část toho cvičení bude tvořit Rokity-Poskart, která je z Opolské univerzity, a ta přednáška nebo ten vstup bude na téma The Impact of Local Labor Market Analysed. Tady vám řeknu jenom pár ještě informací, protože bohužel paní Diana nemohla se zúčastnit online napřímo, znamená, ona tu svoji přednášku přetočila. My se podíváme na záznam. Pokud by vás zajímali nějaké diskutovat, vpravo nahoře máte ikonku ve vašině otázky a odpovědi, takže tam můžete pokládat své otázky k tomu danému tématu. Máte svůj e-mail, tak my všechno pošleme na její univerzitu, na její e-mail a ona nám odpoví buď to nám a my vám to přepošleme, nebo bude odpovídat přímo vám. Po skončení téhle části potom prosím se setkáme zase ve standardní místnosti k tomuhle předmětu, hospodářská politika. Budeme pokračovat ještě diskuzí tady tomuhle vstupu, pokračovat v našich tématech. Tak, já děkuji, z mé strany je tohle všechno a poprosím tady našeho technického odborníka, aby nám tady pustil záznam.
Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know at which hour the presentation will be played, so good morning, good afternoon once more. My name is Diana Rokita-Poskart, and I represent Opole University of Technology, Faculty of Economics and Management. During my presentation, I would like to focus on economic consequences which can be observed when there is an inflow of students in many academic towns and cities. I would like to answer this question. Should the students work or should they not work in academic cities? And I would like to focus on the benefits of their activities for local economy. Just before I would go to the main topic of the presentation, I would like to say a few words about Opole and Opole University of Technology. So look at this slide. Here on the left, you have a map of Poland. On this map, you can see red dot. This red dot is Opole. It is located just in the middle of Opolskie Voivodeship. Opolskie Voivodeship is located in southwestern part of Poland, between very strong regions, very strong voivodeships in economic terms. I'm thinking about Lower Silesia Voivodeship. It is located just on the west part, on the west side. And I'm thinking about Silesia Voivodeship, located in the east. Probably you know the capitals of those voivodeship. This is Wrocław, the capital of Lower Silesia Voivodeship, and Katowice, the capital of Silesia Voivodeship. Those two strong regions and cities attract majors of broadly understood capital, both physical and human. And I have to say that not many remain for Opole, but it doesn't change the fact that Opole and the whole region, Opolskie Voivodeship, are one of the most beautiful city and region in Poland. How we can characterize Opole? Opole is a medium-sized city. Now it's around 130,000 of inhabitants. And as I said before, it is located in southwestern part of Poland. As I mentioned before, Opole is a capital of Opolskie Voivodeship, and it's also said that Opole is a capital of Polish song, because each year in Opole we have the Festival of Polish Songs. Each year it is in July, but this year, because of COVID, it was in September. Opole is also an academic city. In Opole we have 5 universities and around 20,000 of students. So we can say that each 6th inhabitant of Opole is a student. So there is a high relation between number of students and number of inhabitants. It caused that we can suppose that in Opole there is quite high impact of students on local economy of the city. Here you can find few pictures of Opole. I believe that these pictures show you how beautiful Opole is. On some pictures you can find some bridges, quite nice. On some bridges you can find river, and on the one picture you can see Piastowska Tower. So these pictures, by these pictures, I would like to invite you to Opole to show you, to see how beautiful Opole is. Now a few words about Opole University of Technology. We are the only one technical university in Opole. We have about 6,000 of students, and we have many faculties. Most of them are connected with technology. And for more information, you can follow this link that you can find on that slide. As I told you at the beginning, I represent Faculty of Economics and Management. We have 3 majors of study: economics, management, and administration. In my opinion, the students are very happy that they can study over there. We have about 1,000 of students, and we used to have a lot of Erasmus students, but this year probably it will change. So going to the main topic of my presentation, let me present you some information about the consequences of the inflow of students to the towns and cities. Most of them experience the high inflow with the beginning of the new academic year. In Poland, we start in October each year. So a few days ago, to Opole, into many other cities and towns, academic towns and cities, arrived a lot of students. And I can imagine that their appearance in the city caused a lot of consequences. We can see them a lot of short run and long run consequences. Some of them are cultural consequences. For example, a lot of events connected with appearance of students in the city. We can also enumerate some spatial consequences. So those consequences is named studentification. This is term which was first used by Darren Smith, and when he used that term, he thought about the consequences which are connected with concentration of students in some part of the cities and all transformation of the area in local real estate market and local services market. And I can imagine that students can cause demographic consequences. This is because probably I can imagine that some of you would stay after graduation in the academic city in Ostrava. So probably you will have impact of long-term demographic situation of the city. But for me and for this presentation, the most important consequences are economic consequences. I would focus on that. So when we thinking about economic consequences of students in academic towns and cities, we can enumerate, for example, the consequences for the market of goods, the market of services, and the real estate market. This is because students, when they arrive to the city, they spend money over there for goods and services. They participate in some events. They rent flat, rooms, dormitory. So there are quite high impact of students on academic towns and cities in the term of economics. But some of you also probably would work in the city during education. So I can imagine that those students also would have impact of the labor market of academic towns and cities. So After this introduction to the topic, I would like to attract your attention to the results of the research that I have conducted in Opole, so the place when I live and when I work, Opole as an academic town or city. I conducted the research among students. I asked them about many issues. One of the issues that I was conducted, it was work. They work during education and their spendings in Opole during education. This is one part of the research, of the results of the research. We can see on that graph that the majority of students worked during education. About 77% of students took up job during education, higher education. Only about 22% student, it was not working students. So where students work during staying in Opole? It turns out that some students worked outside of Opole, so at the place of residence, about 40%. So it was mainly those students who was commuting to the city, not those students who stayed, who lived in Opole during education, but those students who was commuting to the city from the place of residence. About 20% of students worked abroad. Mostly of our students from Opole worked in Netherlands, in Germany, some of them in Austria, Italy, or Great Britain. They mostly worked during winter or summer holidays. For my research and for this presentation, the most important group of students are those who worked in Opole during taking up studies. So about 28% of students took up jobs in Opole. So I would focus on that group, the students who took up job in Opole during education, in my further presentation. And this is results of the research that are connected with the share of students who took part-time job or full-time job. You can see that most of students took up part-time jobs in Opole, and about 33% of students took full-time job. We can imagine, because of that results, that students have impact of local labor market. Why I said that? This is because enterprises hire students only when they need them, and they fire them when they do not need them. So these enterprises react in a flexible way. So, for example, during COVID time, they do not students, as I can imagine, because they do not have demand for the product and services. So they fired students, and because of that, they could leave the employment on the stable way, the full-time jobs. The next question is, where students work during education in Opole? Most of them worked in retail and service company. So you can see that about 41% of students who worked in Opole during education, they worked in retail, and about 33% they worked in gastronomy and hotel industry. Some of them worked in other sectors of local economy, like education, care of the production, the administration, banking and finance, the construction, IT, logistics, and many others. So I just enumerated a lot of consequences of local activity, professional activity of students in Opole. But we can imagine that students not impact only in direct way, as I mentioned before, But we can also enumerate some indirect impact of students on the labor market. This is because students spend money in the city where the university is located. They increase local demand. They increasing local enterprises' total revenues. And because of that, enterprises are interested in hiring new workers. So student expenses can also have impact of local labor demand. So they create workplaces. In a few minutes, I will show you how I tried to count how many workplaces were created by student spendings. But please look at that slide. Because of my studies, because of my research, I tried to count how much students spent in Opole during the education, during the whole academic year. I asked students in questionnaires how much they spent during the 1 month of academic year in Opole and what was the structure of their consumption. So on that slide, you can see that students who came to Opole for education, they spent about 34 million euro during the whole academic years. Most of that money went to the local enterprises, retail enterprises, and about 6.4 million euro. This is the money that went to local enterprises, services, local enterprises. About 7 million euro. This is the amount of money that students spend on accommodation fees of private renting, and about 3 million. This is the amount of money that students spend on dormitory fees. So, using that formula, I tried to apply the results of the research that I have presented you in the last slide, and I tried to count how many workplaces were created because of the spendings that students spent in the Opole during the whole academic years. So, what I used to that, what data I used to that calculation. At the beginning, I need information how much students spent in the city and what was the structure of the demand. On the previous slide, I showed you that it was about 34 million euro, and I showed you also the structure of that demand. So using that information, I assumed that those money which students spent in the city, most of that is the revenues of local enterprises. So I got information about revenues of entities in given business branches. After that, I also needed some information from Central Statistical Office in Poland. First of all, I needed some information about the share of labor cost in revenues of companies in given business branches. I also needed information about employee cost in companies. And I also needed the information about the cost per workplace in companies in given branches. In that formula that you can see on this slide, I tried to estimate how many workplaces exist in Opole because of student spending. So the result of the estimation is here, what you can see at that slide. I estimated that in Opole, about 355 workplaces was created due to the student expenses in Opole. And we have to remember that this result concerns only first stage of multiplier effect. We can imagine that when enterprises got revenues, they hire new workers, 355 people, and these workers got incomes. And when the incomes are go to the work to the workers, then the workers also spend that money. So we can imagine that the multiplier effect operate in the city, and probably not only 355 workplaces was created, but probably much more, but I didn't count it. So 355 workplaces, this is the number of workplaces that was created only in the first stage of multiplier effect. So I tried to apply the result of the research in simplified model of labor market. You can see the results of the changes what students, their activity make on that simplified model of labor market. This interaction should be considered in the light of two elements of labor market. From the point of the impact of students on the labor supply, and from the perspective of labor demand, because I mentioned that students, when they work, they have impact of labor supply, but when they spend money, they have impact of labor demand. One of the factors that determine the labor supply, as I said earlier, is the number of persons being at the work age. In the case when there is an influx of students, one of the consequences associated with that influx can be increase of the working age population, which will most likely cause an increase in labor supply in academic center. You can see at that slide the shift of the labor supply to the right, from SL to the SL prime. But on the other hand, the influx of students also impact the demand side, as I told you earlier. This is directly attributed to the fact that the labor demand depends on the size of the demand for goods and services, and thus the influx of students to the academic center, the consumer demand in academic center increases. So consequently, this leads to an increase in revenues of local enterprises, and the higher revenues of local enterprises increase the demand for labor in economics in companies satisfying the students' needs. So in that situation, in that simplified model, we can see the shift of labor demand curve to the right, from DL to DL prime. I presented two models and two different effects on the labor market because of wage. The effect depends on the upward shift of the curves. When increase in labor supply is higher than the local demand, then there is a pressure on the decrease of wages. You can see that situation on the left graph. It can be observed especially in retail and service market, because the more workers would like to work, would like to take up jobs, there is a higher supply of labor and there is more decrease of wages. So the graph on the left side. But when there is a higher increase in labor demand, there can be observed the increase of the local wages. It can be observed in whole market, not in particular market, but in whole market of economic towns and cities, after operating income and demand multiplier effect. So probably because of students' consequences of the activity in the academic city, probably the wages will be higher. But this situation, it's not, as I said, as I mentioned before, not in particular market, but in a whole academic towns and cities. So, to summarize everything what I have said earlier, what are the labor market impact of students? So we can see that when there is an inflow of students, and some of them would like to work in the academic city during education, we can see additional labor supply. Because of that, some of students, most of them, work in retail and service enterprises. And most of them took part-time jobs. The students have impact of higher labor market flexibility. Those consequences, what I have mentioned, have impact of the development of local enterprises. And because of that, probably the local community would get higher income. When there is a higher income of local community, probably in most academic towns and cities, there is increase of attractiveness. And of course, that situation can attract much more students to the city. And look at that cycle. When there is an inflow of students to the city, there is an increase of local demand because students spend money in the city. Higher demand causes higher total revenues of local enterprises. And because enterprises have higher total revenues, they need more workers. So there is increase in labor demand on local economy. When there is an increase of labor demand, so we can say that there is increase of employment in the local enterprises, and much more people have jobs, so there is a higher income of local community. So as was presented on the last slide, there is increase of attractiveness of town and city, and this attractiveness attracts much more students to the city. So to summarize how students impact local labor market and local economy of academic towns and cities, we can enumerate some consequences. So first of all, when students arrive to the city, some of them would create additional labor supply. Because they worked in retail and service enterprises, because they take up part-time job, they have impact of labor market flexibility. Because they spend money during the education, they also increase the total revenues of local enterprises. And because of that, local enterprises need more workers, and that situation increase of labor demand. Those consequences which I mentioned cause the development of local enterprises. And when the local enterprises are quite good developed, then we can say that this situation have very good impact on economy, whole economy of academic town and city. So I hope I answered the question whether you as a student should work or should not work. Yes, you should, because your activity, your professional activity at the local labor market and your spendings in the local labor market is very important for most academic towns and cities. Even if you work, you have much more money, and if you have much more money, you can spend it. And if you spend it, you can create additional workplaces. So I know that these consequences which I presented, this is not only once. I'm aware that we observed much more consequences of students' appearance in the city. But this which I enumerated, it seemed the most important, the most interesting for me, and I hope also for you. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question, please use that email to contact with me. Thank you very much for possibility to have presentation during the International Week in Ostrava. I hope next year we will meet in Ostrava. Thank you very much and see you next year.